The Galactic Summit was unlike anything Ethan Walker had ever seen. It took place aboard an ancient, enormous space station that hovered in the void, a monument to the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. The walls gleamed with advanced technology, holographic displays pulsed in every corner, and massive starships, each more magnificent than the last, floated outside, a testament to the might of the aliens attending. Delegates from across the galaxy had come to this prestigious event, each one eager to display their technological superiority, but none more eager than the powerful alien elites. They were dressed in grand robes, with faces that exuded wisdom, strength, and pride. Their ships were sleek, shining, and intimidating, symbols of their centuries-old dominance. Ethan, on the other hand, felt like a speck of dust in the vast, intimidating hall. He was the sole representative from Earth, the human species newly introduced to galactic politics, while the alien diplomats strutted around with their impressive technology and proud airs. Ethan was just a student, a young man with no military background or impressive history. His clothes were simple, a stark contrast to the elegant attire of the alien diplomats. But the most noticeable difference was in their gazes. As Ethan and the human delegation entered the grand hall, the aliens didn't even attempt to hide their contempt. Their eyes, filled with superiority, looked down at him. They scoffed at the humans, whispering among themselves. "They're primitive," one alien whispered to another. "What could they possibly bring to the table?" Ethan could hear them, their words like daggers to his heart. His palms were sweaty, his legs shaky, but his determination kept him standing tall. He wasn't there by choice. He was there because humanity had earned a seat at the table, and he was about to prove it. The alien diplomats couldn't understand why humans had been invited to such an important summit. After all, Earth was a planet with a history of war and chaos. The human race had only recently mastered space travel, and their technology was still catching up to the mighty forces of the Galactic Council. In their eyes, humanity was nothing more than a footnote in the grand story of the universe. Yet here was Ethan Walker, barely out of adolescence, standing among them, preparing to give a speech that could change everything. The tension in the room was thick, but what caught Ethan off guard wasn't just the dismissive attitude of the alien elites, it was their curiosity. While they didn't believe for a second that the human delegation could offer anything of value, they were still intrigued. "What could a mere student say to us?" one alien leader, Sarek, muttered under his breath, smirking. The camera shifted to Ethan, showing his face, which was a mixture of anxiety and determination. There was no going back now. He had been chosen for this task, and it wasn't because of his background in diplomacy or his qualifications. He was chosen because he was human, and humanity needed someone to represent them. But how would this young, nervous student, with no experience in galactic politics, make an impact on beings so far beyond Earth's reach? Everyone expected him to fail. No one in the hall believed his words could matter. The more powerful races of the galaxy had seen it all. What could a human have to offer them? As Ethan's time on the stage approached, the room seemed to grow colder. Alien leaders whispered among themselves, some eyeing him with disdain, others with faint amusement. In their eyes, he was nothing more than a curiosity, a brief moment of entertainment. Yet Ethan knew that the future of humanity was riding on his speech. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had no military might, no advanced technologies like those around him. But he had something far more important: humanity's strength, resilience, and will to survive. And that was something no amount of alien superiority could take away. His heart pounded as he stepped onto the podium, the silence in the hall almost suffocating. The cameras turned toward him, their lenses zooming in. His voice was the only sound in the room. Every alien diplomat turned their gaze to him, intrigued but skeptical. Some were eager to hear what foolishness he might speak, while others couldn't wait for him to stumble. "Good evening, esteemed diplomats of the Galactic Council," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. I stand before you as a representative of Earth, a species that has fought, struggled, and survived for centuries. We come from a planet that has faced the harshest challenges, from war to environmental collapse. And yet, we're still here. We have not just survived, we have thrived. The room was silent, and for the first time, Ethan noticed the faint flicker of uncertainty in the eyes of some of the alien leaders, but the majority of them exchanged looks of disbelief. Ethan could feel their mockery, but he wasn't about to back down now. He took another deep breath. You look at us as primitive. You see our technology as outdated, our history as a series of failures. But what you fail to see is our resilience. The human race has been brought to the brink of extinction more than once, and we've come back each time, stronger, smarter, and more determined. You may think we are beneath you, but I promise you, we will not be ignored. Ethan's words echoed in the chamber, stirring something deep within the alien delegates. He spoke not just of Earth's survival, but of the fierce determination of its people. For a brief moment, the mocking smiles of the aliens faltered, replaced by curiosity. What was this human speaking of? Could it be possible that their perceived weakness was actually strength? Ethan continued, "We are not here to beg for your approval. We are here to show you that we belong. Humanity is not a footnote in the history of this galaxy. We are a force to be reckoned with." The room was still, the air thick with tension. No one expected such a bold statement. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Ethan, with all his might, stood his ground, determined to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. As he finished his speech, the entire room was quiet. No one knew how to respond. The arrogance of the alien elites had been challenged, but by whom? A young human student, standing alone, had just shaken the very foundation of their belief in galactic supremacy. Would they dismiss him as a fool, or would they begin to see humanity for what it truly was? The next moments would decide not just Ethan's fate, but the future of all humankind. The tension was unbearable, but Ethan didn't flinch. He was human, and he had just made his mark on the galaxy. The moment Ethan finished his speech, a wave of silence washed over the grand hall. The diplomats, each one a representative of the most advanced species in the galaxy, remained frozen in place, their expressions shifting from disbelief to incredulity. But as the silence grew, it was soon replaced by a subtle yet unmistakable mockery. The alien elites exchanged sharp, disparaging glances, their disdain for humanity no longer hidden behind polite facades. Zarek, the towering leader of one of the galaxy's most technologically advanced species, leaned forward, his dark eyes gleaming with amusement. His voice was low but venomous as he spoke to his colleagues. Incompetent, primitive, what gives this child the arrogance to think he can stand before us and speak of strength? What does Earth have to offer except a history of war and failure? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The other delegates, who had once shown curiosity, now allowed their contempt to flow freely. To them, humanity was nothing more than a blip in the grand story of the universe, a species struggling to catch up, not even worth their time. They spoke of Earth as if it were a forgotten relic, its people no more significant than the ants beneath their feet. Ethan could hear every word, the whispers, the mocking laughs, the judgment. His heart raced, but he refused to show weakness. His fists clenched at his sides, his breath shaky but controlled. As the camera zoomed in on his face, the audience could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Was he truly the right person for this? Could humanity really stand up to these powerful beings? The pressure weighed on him like a physical force. This was supposed to be a moment of unity, a chance to prove humanity's worth. But instead, it felt like the entire galaxy was turning its back on him. Ethan stood there, feeling small and insignificant, but then his mind wandered back to Earth. He remembered the wars, years of conflict that left countless lives shattered, cities reduced to rubble. But amidst the destruction, there were always people who fought for a better future, people who refused to give up. He thought of his parents, of the stories they had told him of humanity's resilience, the way people picked themselves up even after losing everything. The wars, the poverty, the environmental collapse, they hadn't broken humanity. No matter how many times they were knocked down, humans had always gotten back up. His grip tightened and his posture straightened. Ethan wasn't just representing himself, he was representing all of Earth. His people might not have the advanced technology or the centuries-old empires of the alien races in the room, but they had something far more important: the will to survive, to keep fighting. Tarek's mocking laughter filled the air. Primitive, incompetent, he repeated, his voice booming across the hall. His words cut through the air like a knife, sharp and cruel. He turned to the other leaders, shaking his head as if to dismiss Ethan and everything he stood for. How did we ever allow these creatures into our midst? The whispers grew louder, more venomous. Ethan's gaze shifted between the alien faces. Some were amused, others indifferent, and a few even seemed to pity him. It was clear they thought him humanity, no more than a fleeting curiosity, just a species trying to play in a league far beyond its reach. But even in the face of such overwhelming mockery, Ethan didn't falter. He had heard these kinds of things before. Not from aliens, but from his own people. They had doubted humanity's potential for centuries. Every great discovery, every triumph, was met with disbelief. But they kept going. Earth had its flaws, its scars, but it had never stopped moving forward. As Ethan looked up, his gaze locked onto Xarek. The alien leader was towering over him, a smirk plastered across his face, his massive form casting a long shadow. Ethan felt the weight of the leader's presence, the power radiating from him. But Ethan stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. His thoughts sharpened, focusing on the one thing that mattered: humanity's fight for survival. The camera shifted focus to Xarek, the towering alien leader who had become the face of the galaxy's elite. His towering form loomed over the room, his chiseled features twisted into an expression of disdain as he spoke. Humanity, you are nothing but a small war-ravaged speck in the galaxy. Your people may have once believed they were destined for greatness, but look at your world, look at your technology. It pales in comparison to ours. You have no place here. Ethan could feel the insult hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. He knew what Xarek was doing. He was trying to break him, to remind him of humanity's supposed insignificance. But Ethan wasn't about to let that happen. He had to make them see the truth, the strength that humanity held within itself, no matter what these alien elites thought of him. A flash of emotion passed through his mind. He thought about his mother, his father, his entire family who had fought through hardship. They weren't extraordinary by alien standards, but they were extraordinary to him. Humans were survivors. They were fighters. It didn't matter how many times they were knocked down. They always got back up. As Ethan gathered himself, the camera zoomed in once more on Xarek's mocking smile. But Ethan knew this was the moment to prove humanity's worth. The moment where one young man, against all odds, would remind the galaxy that Earth's true strength was not in its technology, but in its spirit. His eyes narrowed with determination, a silent vow forming within him. The aliens may have dismissed humanity as nothing more than a primitive, insignificant species, but Ethan was about to show them just how wrong they were. His speech wasn't over. He had only just begun. Ethan Walker stood at the podium, feeling the weight of the galaxy's judgment pressing down on him. The grand hall had fallen into an eerie silence as the last remnants of laughter from the alien diplomats faded away. The eyes of the entire room shifted toward him, their gazes a mix of mockery, curiosity, and disdain. They were expecting him to fail, to stutter, to fall flat on his face. But Ethan wasn't here to meet their expectations. He was here to change them. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and then spoke. Humanity doesn't need your approval. We fought wars to survive, and now we fight for our place among the stars. His voice grew more impassioned as he neared the end of his speech. You think we're weak. You think we're just a small, war-ravaged planet in a far-off corner of the galaxy. But what you don't understand is that Earth's strength doesn't come from our technology or our wealth. It comes from the very spirit of our people. We are a species that has fought, bled, and persevered. And we are here to stay. The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. The alien leaders, who had once seen humanity as insignificant, were now faced with the raw power of a human will that refused to be ignored. Ethan had shown them something they hadn't anticipated, a glimpse of the strength of a species that had endured through countless trials. And for the first time in the history of galactic diplomacy, the powerful and advanced alien civilizations were beginning to realize that humanity was not something to be dismissed. It was something they would have to reckon with. The tension in the room was palpable. The silence that followed Ethan's speech was thick with anticipation. What would the diplomats do next? Would they continue to mock humanity, or would they recognize the fire burning in Ethan's words and the unyielding strength of the human spirit? As Ethan finished, he stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the room one last time. He hadn't come here to make friends or win approval. He had come to prove that humanity was worthy of its place in the stars. And for the first time, the galaxy had no choice but to listen. The silence that followed Ethan's bold declaration felt like a weight pressing down on the entire room. His word hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of the galactic elite's beliefs about humanity. For a moment, it seemed as though no one knew how to respond. The alien diplomats, who had spent centuries in power, looked at each other, unsure of how to react to a young human who had just dared to stand up to them. But then, it happened. One of the diplomats, a tall, slender alien with a slick, silver-blue exoskeleton, rose from his seat. His piercing red eyes glowed with indignation, and his voice rang out, sharp and full of contempt. "Knave," he spat. "You speak of survival and strength, but you fail to understand that the universe does not care for your struggles. You are small, primitive, and insignificant. Nothing more than a dying species clinging to a dying planet." The room shifted at the sound of his voice. Several other diplomats stood, murmuring in agreement. They, too, were enraged at the challenge to their superiority. But despite their angry words, there was a noticeable hesitation in their movements. The venomous words they hurled at Ethan seemed hollow, as though they couldn't quite bring themselves to strike with the same certainty they had before. There was a crack in their once unshakable confidence. Ethan, however, didn't falter. He stood firm, his posture straight, and his eyes locked onto the speaker. His voice rang out once again, unwavering. "We are not here to ask for your approval. We are here because we deserve to stand alongside you." His words cut through the tense atmosphere like a blade, sharpening the edge of the challenge. He had made his point clear. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't begging. Humanity wasn't here to grovel at the feet of the alien elites. It was here because it had earned the right to exist, to be part of this galaxy, to fight for its place among the stars. Ethan wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every human who had ever fought, struggled, and sacrificed for the future of Earth. The camera zoomed in on the alien leader who had stood up to challenge Ethan. His name was Cyric, a large, imposing figure with reptilian features and jagged scales that ran down his spine. His fangs were exposed, and his deep, guttural voice echoed as he spoke again. "You dare question the authority of the Galactic Council?" He growled. "We are the ones who decide who belongs in this galaxy, not you." But Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes never left Cyric's face, even as the alien leader towered over him. There was a calm confidence in Ethan's demeanor, something the aliens had not expected from a mere human. He met Cyric's gaze with unshakable resolve. "You may decide who enters your borders, but you do not decide who we are. We decide that." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The other diplomats exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disbelief and growing unease. Ethan's words had struck a chord, and they couldn't ignore it. The mocking atmosphere that had filled the hall earlier now seemed distant, as if it had been replaced by something else, something unspoken. The fear of losing control, of being exposed as vulnerable, had crept into the minds of the alien leaders. One by one, the diplomats looked down, their hands gripping their chairs as they struggled to maintain their composure. The arrogance that had once defined their presence now seemed shaky, fragile. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were beginning to realize their mistake. Ethan had made them question their assumptions, and that was something they weren't prepared for. Just then, the atmosphere shifted again. A new voice, calm and steady, cut through the growing tension. Enough. All eyes turned to the speaker, a large alien who had been silent throughout the debate. His name was Erish, the leader of one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. Erish had been one of the most vocal critics of humanity earlier, mocking them openly. But now, as the tension hung thick in the air, he stood, his eyes fixed on Ethan with a new expression, one of consideration. Erish was known for his cold demeanor, his sharp intellect, and his calculated nature. He had been the one to suggest that humanity had no place in the galactic order, the one who had laughed the loudest at their presence. But now he was silent, observing Ethan closely. The room fell quiet, all eyes shifting toward him, waiting to see how he would react. With a subtle nod, Erish acknowledged Ethan's words. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of respect, a sign that something had shifted. The once unimpressed alien leader now saw Ethan not as a threat, but as a force to be reckoned with. Ethan's eyes met Erish's for a brief moment, and in that instant, he knew that the battle was far from over. He wasn't about to win over the entire council with a single speech, but he had made an impact. He had forced them to acknowledge humanity's strength, and that alone was a victory. The tension in the room didn't fully dissipate, but the shift was undeniable. The alien diplomats, who had once seen humanity as weak and insignificant, were now forced to reconsider their stance. Ethan had spoken the truth, not just for Earth, but for every human who had ever fought to survive. And while the galaxy's elite still held the power, they knew, deep down, that they couldn't continue to ignore the rising force that was humanity. As the room sat in a stunned silence, Ethan's heart raced. He had done what he came to do. He had shown them that humanity wasn't a species to be dismissed. They had earned their place, and no matter how much the galaxy's elite tried to ignore it, they couldn't change that fact. For the first time in the history of galactic diplomacy, humanity had made its mark, and the alien diplomats knew it. The room was thick with tension. The silence that followed Ethan's words felt like an eternity, each second stretching out longer than the last. The alien diplomats, those who had mocked and belittled humanity only moments before, now found themselves in a strange position. Uncertainty. They had never been forced to face such a challenge, especially not from a species they had once considered beneath them. Ethan stood firm, his posture straight, his eyes locked onto the faces of the alien leaders who had once dismissed humanity with contempt. The quiet murmurs from the corners of the room grew louder as the diplomats began to shift in their seats, exchanging words in hushed tones. They had been caught off guard, their belief in their own superiority shaken by a single human who had dared to stand up to them. The camera panned over the faces of the alien leaders. Some were sneering, their pride still intact but wavering, while others looked troubled, their brows furrowed in deep thought. For the first time in this grand council hall, they were questioning everything they had known about humanity. Ethan's speech had cut through their arrogance like a knife, exposing their own weaknesses. They were powerful, yes, but they were not invincible. As the murmurs grew louder, the weight of the situation seemed to grow heavier. The council hall, once filled with smug self-assurance, now felt suffocating, almost claustrophobic. Ethan, the young human with no military background, had somehow turned the tables. The camera zoomed out, showing the grand hall in all its vastness. The alien elites, who had once held themselves above everyone else, now seemed unsure of themselves. The human delegation, who had been looked down upon as insignificant, now stood tall. Even the youngest members of the group, who had once felt out of place in such a prestigious setting, now held their heads high, their eyes filled with pride. Ethan had done the unthinkable. He had shown them that humanity was not weak. He had proven that humanity could not be dismissed so easily. And as the camera lingered on the faces of the alien leaders, it was clear things had changed. The human delegation, who had been the joke of the summit, was now a force to be reckoned with. In the back of the room, a quiet conversation took place between two alien leaders, their voices low but their words sharp. "He's right," one of them said, his voice tinged with hesitation. "We've underestimated them for far too long. They are not what we thought." The other nodded slowly. They'd fought wars to survive, built entire civilizations from nothing. If they can endure that, can they truly be so easily dismissed? The realization was dawning on the alien diplomats, one by one. Humanity was not a species to be dismissed, to be looked down upon. They were survivors, built by adversity, and they had earned their place in the galaxy. It was a humbling thought for the alien elites who had never truly considered the depth of humanity's strength. Ethan's words echoed in the hall, and for a moment, it seemed like the very air itself had changed. The alien leaders, who had once sneered at the thought of humans entering the galactic fold, were now beginning to reconsider. Some even looked at each other, exchanging nods of agreement. There was a shift in the atmosphere, subtle, yet undeniable. The foundation of their beliefs was cracking. The camera cut to Ethan's face, his eyes calm but filled with determination. He had done what he came to do. He had proven that humanity was not weak. He had shown them that humans could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful species in the galaxy. And as the murmurs of agreement began to grow, Ethan knew that the summit was far from over. There was still much to be decided, but one thing was certain. Humanity had earned a place at the table. But not everyone in the room was ready to accept this new reality. Some alien leaders, particularly those who had been the most vocal in their mockery of humanity, refused to back down. Their pride had been wounded, and they weren't going to let it go so easily. One such leader, a tall and imposing figure named Korthak, slammed his fist down on the table. His alien features contorted in anger as he addressed the assembly. "This is madness," he bellowed. "You are all so quick to bow to a human who has done nothing but speak in riddles. What proof do we have that they are worthy of our respect? What have they accomplished that makes them deserving of a place among us?" The room fell into an uneasy silence as Korthak's words rang out. His anger was palpable, his disdain for humanity obvious. But even as he spoke, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Ethan's speech had planted a seed, one that couldn't be easily ignored. And deep down, Korthak knew that his words, however harsh, were no longer enough to sway the opinions of the other leaders. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "If you think humanity is weak, you are mistaken," he said, his tone unwavering. "We are a species forged in adversity. We have fought wars, faced extinction, and still, we rise. We will not bow to your technological superiority. We will fight for our place in the galaxy, and we will not be silenced." His words hung in the air, bold and defiant. The camera pulled back again, revealing the vast council hall, where the once dominant alien leaders now seemed smaller, unsure of themselves. Ethan's declaration had been a challenge, not just to Korthak, but to every alien in the room. And though some tried to mask it, the impact was undeniable. The human delegation, once ridiculed, was now standing tall, no longer the underdog. The camera shifted again, capturing the faces of the other diplomats. Some nodded in agreement, their expressions shifting from skepticism to respect. They could see now that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. They had endured far more than any of them could imagine, and they were still here, still fighting. The turning point had arrived. The question now was, would the summit end in peace, or would the alien leaders continue to resist humanity's rise? Only time would tell. But one thing was clear. Ethan's speech had irrevocably changed the course of galactic diplomacy, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The atmosphere in the Grand Council Hall was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of change hanging in the air. The summit was drawing to a close, but the discussions that had taken place over the last few days would echo throughout the galaxy for years to come. There were mixed reactions, as expected. Some alien species, once firmly against any idea of humanity's place in the galactic community, were now reconsidering their stance. A few even proposed opening new negotiations with Earth, recognizing the strength and resilience of humanity. However, there were others, more stubborn, more prideful, who remained hostile, their minds unchanged by Ethan's passionate speech. They still saw humanity as inferior, as a species not worthy of their time or respect. But the truth was undeniable. Humanity's position in the galaxy had changed. No longer were they the weak, insignificant species that others could easily mock. They had fought for survival on their own world, overcoming wars, environmental collapse, and countless obstacles. Now, they stood at the threshold of something greater. Ethan had made sure of that. His words had struck a chord, and even if some refused to admit it, humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. The camera focused on Ethan as he made his way back to his delegation. His face was tired, exhaustion written in the lines of his features. But there was also pride in his eyes. He had done what no one else had dared to do. He had taken humanity's place at the table, and his speech had changed the way the galaxy viewed Earth. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced back over his shoulder at the alien leaders who were still in heated discussion. It had been a battle of words, and in that moment, it felt like humanity had won, at least for now. Ethan's delegation, who had once felt so out of place in this room of alien elites, now stood tall. The young human diplomats were still processing everything that had just transpired. They had witnessed a shift in power, and they knew that they had been part of something monumental. The camera shifted to capture their faces, each one filled with a mix of disbelief, pride, and hope. They had gone from being the underdogs to being treated as equals. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like humanity had a chance. As the summit came to a close, the alien leaders began to disperse. Some of them exchanged sharp words, their pride still evident, while others quietly retreated, pondering the events that had just unfolded. The air was thick with tension, but there was also an undercurrent of something new, an acknowledgement of humanity's strength. The screen faded to black, but the weight of the moment lingered, leaving the audience with a sense of both victory and anticipation for what was to come next. Humanity had proven its worth, but what would the future hold? The galaxy was vast, and the road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity had made its mark. And then, just as the screen was about to cut to credits, a new image appeared. It was subtle at first, just a glimpse of something unfamiliar, something mysterious. The camera panned across a dark, distant corner of the galaxy, revealing a ship unlike any the humans had seen before. It was sleek, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow, and it hovered silently in the shadows, watching. The beings aboard this ship were not like the ones Ethan had just faced. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity and calculation. They were watching the summit unfold from afar, intrigued by the sudden shift in power. These aliens had never interacted with humanity, but they were watching now. They had been paying attention. The screen lingered on this mysterious race for a moment longer, the tension building as the camera zoomed in on their glowing eyes. Were they friends, or were they another force to be reckoned with? The camera cut back to Earth, to the humans who had just secured their place in the galaxy. The music swelled, dramatic and full of promise, but the sense of uncertainty remained. For all the victory humanity had achieved, the future was still unclear. The galaxy was full of dangers, and there was much they didn't yet understand. The human delegation had earned respect, but there were still challenges ahead. Ethan had started a new chapter for Earth, one where humanity's strength was recognized. But how long would that respect last? Would it be enough to secure peace, or would the hostile forces remain a threat? The camera lingered on Ethan's face, his expression thoughtful but determined. He knew that the journey had only just begun. There were more battles to fight, more diplomatic struggles to face, but for the first time, humanity had a real chance. They were no longer just surviving. They were stepping into the future, ready to shape their place in the stars. The camera zoomed out, showing Earth from space. The blue and green planet glowed brightly, surrounded by the vast, dark expanse of space. Humanity had proven that it could survive, but now it was time to prove that it could thrive. And as the camera continued to pull back, a final shot was shown. The mysterious alien ship, still watching, still waiting. Its presence was a reminder that the galaxy was full of unknowns, and humanity's journey was far from over. As the screen faded to black, the audience was left with one lingering thought. Earth had taken its first steps toward becoming a galactic power, but the true test was yet to come. Would humanity rise to the challenge, or would the unknown forces of the galaxy seek to bring them down? Only time would tell. But for now, Earth had made its mark.